Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times. Welcome to my channel, welcome to a little bit of Endless Space 2. So today we're going to be talking about the ships, and I'm just getting this tutorial a bit out of the way so I can talk about each of the individual factions and their strategies with the ships without having to refer back to all of these basic concepts as we are going through it. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about the tactics here. You can change them up through this menu here. There are up to 5 tactics that you can get, and essentially these dictate the way that your ships move, as indicated by these little lines here. So these are referred to in the game as flotillas, and you can tell from where they are here how close they start to the enemy. Or rather, the desired range to the enemy is how I should put that. So each of these cards will give you where each different flotilla, which is a third of your fleet, will deploy. But if you don't have a large enough fleet, you will only use the middle line. If you've got a somewhat larger fleet, you'll have the first 2 lines, and it's only the very large fleets that have all 3 of these unlocked. So you're going to want to pick cards and ships based on these different ranges, because these are incredibly important for how your ships are going to actually perform. They vary between sort of offense and defense, and I'm going to let you guys take your own time to sort of review each of the tactics that you unlock. But generally speaking, I find that the most important thing to consider when picking your tactics is the range that you want to engage an enemy at. And you want to have a card that allows you to engage, like let's say that I'm against all missiles. Even if I have a relatively long medium range strategy, I might want to pick Turtle, just because that allows me to get in close against those missiles where they're practically ineffective. By contrast, if I'm up against, say, kinetic weapons, and I'm using, say, beams and lasers or something like that, I might want to use power to shields, even though my weapons are not optimally effective at that range, or he's using kinetics, so the shield power doesn't really make a difference. The reason is that that lets me stay at that long range for longer. I might want to choose Get Lucky if I want to be closer in with one of my lanes there, and I might want to pick something like Hard Target if I want to be at that sort of mid-range there, or something like that with laser weapons or something like that. Now, you're generally going to also have your thing fit your weapon system a little bit better than what I was describing there. So if I had missiles in my fleets, I might want to choose barrage fire. If I had kinetic weapons, I might have more close range ones. But generally speaking, that's kind of how this goes here. So pretty simple system, but it is very vital to understanding how battles are going to work. One of the other things to note about these, different lanes interact with other lanes differently. So if I'm in lane 3 over here, my ability to fire at enemies that are in lane 1 and 2 may be obfuscated depending on the formation that we end up flying in. So it's not always clear as to how effective one of these is going to be in an overall battle, just because they might pick one where your flotilla ends up facing away from their ships, and if that happens, then your ship can get shot in the back without being able to retaliate. So there are instances where it's important to sort of get that nuance there, but that's a little bit too in-depth for this video. In any event there, let's talk about things that can get us some bonuses to our ships. So first of all, let's talk about heroes. Heroes are one of the more interesting ways to get your sort of bonuses to ships, because oftentimes I find it's better to have heroes in your cities, but being able to sort of pop one into a fleet and having them have really powerful upgrades for your ships is a perfectly valid thing to do. In this particular case, this guy is a pretty good fleet leader. He's got +6 movement to fleets. He's got +80% damage on his individual ship, which is not that good. He's got 70% damage to the fleet, +40% energy weapon damage to the fleet, +33% shield capacity for his fleet, and +25% health for the fleet. He also unlocks the bigger is better battle strategy. So this is a powerful fleet leader, and if I add him in, he can really change the tide of a battle that would otherwise potentially go a little bit poorly for me. But he is still pretty good at leading a city, and I would much rather he be in a city under normal circumstances. So one of the things you can do is treat your heroes as an emergency backup. If you see an enemy fleet, or if you know that you're in a situation where you desperately need to fight something that's going to be really difficult for you to beat, you can throw a hero into there, and they'll suddenly bolster that fleet to the point where you can actually take on that enemy that's a little bit too strong for you. The other way that you can do this is through policies. Now, I don't have any with this particular playthrough, but there are plenty of policies that are available. So, for example, the Fleet Fortitude decree there. If I was to go for the, let's say here, mine's bigger one, +33% damage on weapon modules, so I could increase my damage by 33% there. Let's see what else there is. The Deadly Intent bill. So +33% damage on weapon modules and +33% troop damage, of course, for the militarists there. So there are a couple different ways in this game to improve the power of your ships and make them temporarily stronger. Now, the thing about these different things here, that these do have very large costs associated with them in terms of upkeep. You can see that I'm only paying 64. But Peace and Prayer Act here is equivalent to one of those top tier ones there. If I enacted that one, my law upkeep goes up to 320. So you're only going to want to enact these laws when you've got a battle, because there's no reason for you to be spending this much influence when you're not going to be fighting someone. Now, you do have to keep it active for a turn, but you just have it active until you're done the fight, and then once you're out of the fight, you disable the law. So same thing with the hero. Once he's allowed to redeploy, you redeploy him back to the city where his economic bonus is going to be doing some good, rather than having him idling around in a fleet doing nothing. So those are two important things. The different laws that you're going to have available are going to have an impact on what type of military you can have, what sort of bonuses you can rely on, and what sort of emergency procedures you can have to bolster your fleet. In addition to that, the types of heroes that you can find randomly are, of course, going to make a difference there. But what really is going to matter in a very strong degree there is the starting heroes that you're likely to get. As the Vodiani, for example, you definitely start off with a Vodiani hero, and he has access to these lovely skills here, including, for example, the Burning Light one, plus 40% energy weapon damage to the fleet there, plus 6 movement as well. And he starts off as well as a Guardian type, which gives you access to post-relativistic targeting, plus 40% damage to the fleet there, and plus 33% shield capacity and plus 25% damage. So he is a really great damage bolsterer, and you're guaranteed to start with this as the Vodiani. You don't necessarily start with this with other factions. And quite often you're also going to get access to Enav St. Lair. You also get usually 2 other Vodiani heroes as the Vodiani, but for some reason I got Cravers. But in any event, yeah, this is kind of how this works. You have different quality of heroes, and that is going to impact how effective throwing a hero into your fleet is going to be. Sometimes they're so bad at fleet support, and you want to thumb over their abilities beforehand, that there's not really going to be any point in using them in that capacity, and you're just going to keep them on planets no matter what you're doing. So anyway, let's take a look at the individual ships here. Now, the first thing let's talk about here is the weapons. So I think this is going to be a fairly common question here. What is the best weapon? And the answer to that is going to be the missiles, the lasers, and the kinetic weapons under different circumstances. So the reason that the missiles and the lasers are the best weapons is that they're the damage per second weapons. These are the weapons that you're going to want to use if you want to deal damage. I'm going to actually hit show obsolete module so we can compare the very, very baseline models here. Now, the very basic missile there has 28 damage per second, which is the highest out of the starting weapons. The basic gun here only has 25, which is 3 points lower, which is not seemingly that bad. It looks like it's a pretty similar amount, but we'll get to why that's vastly inferior to the missiles later in terms of damage. And then you've got access to the basic Opal laser, which is only 13 damage, which is pretty low, but it also has 10% critical chance. So what exactly is it that makes these different weapons better or worse at sort of offense? Well, for one thing, the basic missiles here just have the highest damage out of all of them. If you go up the chain and are comparing equivalents, I don't have an equivalent here. Basic decay torpedoes are a tier lower than my highest level of slug. It's more actually equivalent to this one here, the basic perfected slug. But if you compare sort of these two together, generally speaking, the missiles have some attributes that are going to make them a lot more powerful, just the damage value and the fact that they start off as long-range weapons. Now, the way that those lanes work that I was talking about earlier, you start at the longer of the distances chosen. So if one person chooses to be long range and the other person chooses a lane that is short range, you'll start at long range and then move to close range. This means that the missiles are guaranteed to be able to fire at their optimal distance of 100 long range there. They're going to then fire at medium only if you close with each other, and then they're going to fire at short range only if anything survived the first 2 turns. So realistically speaking, you're always going to have 100% to hit rate for the first bit, and if things go downhill from there, then so be it. You've had that sort of initial alpha strike of the highest damage possible at that range. By contrast, if you were to take these away here and replace it with nothing but basic high-eye slugs here, these things have 10% damage at long range. So the accuracy at that long range, it means that almost all their shots are going to miss. It's not until you get to short range that they get their good accuracy, and even then it's the lowest overall accuracy in the game if you were to tally all of these together. Less than 50% for the overall accuracy. So most of the time, most of your shots are going to go wide unless your opponent also decides to start at close range. Now, once you do close to short range, if you somehow survived all the bullshit heading in, then you'll shred the enemy ship apart, absolutely. But for offensive purposes, this weapon is a little bit weak. The reason that this is one of the best weapons in the game is from this flak value here. And this allows you to shoot down missiles. So if you have more flak guns than they have got missiles, you won't take any damage at all from missiles, negating that sort of weapon system entirely. So what makes the last weapon good? Well, the basic laser here, it has a seemingly low amount of damage, but you'll notice that it has 50% accuracy at long range, 100% accuracy at medium range, and 50% at short. Out of those three weapons, it has the highest total accuracy at 200% there, sort of averaging at 66.6% or whatever. So this means that these lasers are going to be able to deal moderate damage no matter what strategy you use. Obviously, you're going to want to hang out at medium range for the longest period of time because that puts you at 100% and other weapons at not 100%. But the amount of damage that means that you're dealing with this guy, let's hit detailed stats here, is going to be 13 at long range, 27, and then 13. So you can take a look at the basic high eye slug instead here. It's 5, then 25, and then 42. So if we assume that we're probably going to be dead by the time we get into phase 2, which is pretty typical, we've got a total of 30 damage between those two lanes. Then we get the basic sync laser here. Oops, this is the wrong one. If we look at this guy here, we add the damage together, it's 40, so it's a little bit higher than the kinetics there. And obviously it's less than the missiles, but unlike the kinetic weapons, or unlike with the lasers, like these can be countered. These can be completely negated by a use of the kinetic weapons. So the fact that this has by far the most damage during those first two phases is somewhat irrelevant if that damage gets completely blocked by kinetic type weapons. So generally speaking, the way that this game works, you're going to want to use kinetic weapons to negate someone else's missile advantage. You're going to want to use missiles if you can get away with it, because you'll deal the most damage by far with those. And you're going to want to use lasers if you don't have the ability to overwhelm your opponent's defenses. So that's kind of the rock, paper, scissors of those weapons. Now, I haven't been talking about beams, and the reason is that these things are a little bit janky. You'll notice that if I consider the first two range increments, these things are less damage than, say, the laser. In fact, if we compare the basic laser, the basic plasma beam here is 9 damage per second of that. It really just is, like, overall, this is 27 overall here, and this one here is 27 as well. The thing is, if I can get into that medium range and stay in that medium range, then the opal laser does just as much damage as this thing. It's also got a 5% higher critical chance. So there are very few instances where I find the plasma type beams, like this type of beam, to be useful. I think it actually needs a slight buff. There's really realistically no times where I find these things to be super useful. The reason that I might consider using them is if I'm going for missiles and am overkilling the enemy by too much, in which case I need to have a secondary type of weapon that works well at long range, and these things fit that bill. It also would give my missile fleet the ability to have some punch up at close range, but that splits my sort of damage types between kinetic and energy, which you don't really want to do there. So yeah, these ones just kind of aren't very good. For offensive purposes, you're looking at the lasers and the missiles, and for defensive purposes, you're looking at the kinetics, and that's basically how you think about the weapons here. So in any event, let's start talking about the different ships and the different classes. First, we're going to talk about the exploration ship. We're only going to talk about this briefly in passing. So the thing about the exploration type ships is that they are not really a military ship, but they often can be used as one. They don't have any particular target priority traits there. They don't have any combat-related traits. It's all based on sort of exploring, which makes sense given their given role. They generally have few slots, and they're not necessarily that capable of going toe-to-toe with dedicated military vessels. But the reason that you would sort of load up on these guys is that they are available early game. They're relatively inexpensive to produce, and depending on the type that you have, you may be able to fend off pirates or early game player rushes with these sorts of ships. So don't underestimate them, but the strength of an individual nation's scout ship is going to depend on two things: how good the individual scout ship itself is, and how it compares to your initial attacker. So if it's close to the initial attacker, even if it's not necessarily that good, I would still recommend using them, just because getting the technology to get that expensive attack ship might not necessarily be too worth it if you have to struggle to get it, if you're not going to get a major benefit from upgrading to that new ship type. This does lead us on to the discussion about the small attackers. So the size of the ship does tell you a couple things. For one thing, each ship in the game costs a certain number of command points, unless it's a hero, in which case it's free. You're limited to 1 hero per fleet. But the number of command points that you have in the ship indicates how many ships you can have of that type in a fleet. So my limit in this particular game is, I believe, 24. So I could have 24 of these guys if I wanted to, but then I'd have only this type of ship. I could also have 12 of these guys and 12 of the small protector, or I could have a mix of the medium-sized ships in these ships, just as long as the total amount of command points consumed is equal to 24, my command point limit. So in any event, the other trait that small-sized ships have is they've got 100 points of hull weakness. This goes into some very complicated math that results in your actual defense values, but we're going to largely skim over that. You can sort of go into the math of that yourself. The most important thing to say is that defensive modules on smaller ships provide a larger bonus than they do on larger ships, but larger ships have a lot more hit points and get more hit points from those modules. So you're going to be playing a sort of weird game to try to optimize defenses if you're thinking about, should I use small protectors or should I use medium coordinators, which are the same sort of class for defense. The other trait that these guys have is called attacker. Now, there are two types of ships that have the same priorities, and you'll notice here that we say that our primary targets for this type of ship are protector and coordinator ships. The reason it's both of those together is because protectors and coordinators are the same type of ship. They're the defender protective type class of ship. The only difference is that one is medium and one is small. The same thing goes for attacker. The same priority list exists for hunters, which are the medium-sized attackers. The reason that these guys target the defensive ships first is that's how you make the defensive ships useful at their role of defending. So it's not actually a positive thing that they will attack those ships first. That's just a consequence of those defender ships being good at their job. Next up, you've got bonuses. Every ship class has these types of bonuses there. If you don't have the focus fire trait, your shots are randomly determined. So a ship will fire at one ship and then might fire at a different ship later. Or sometimes, depending on what type of weapons you're using, sometimes I've noticed ships like carriers in particular will continue firing at the same ship over and over and over again. The main problem with the not having focus fire, though, is that if you've got a whole bunch of ships in a flotilla that are all firing at different targets, it means that it's going to take you a lot longer to kill any individual target. So focus fire is a really, really important trait and allows the attackers to do their job much, much more efficiently. It is, however, the cause of massive overkill if you're using missile weapons, where your ships just, every single missile opens up on some poor defenseless ship and it immediately explodes, and you've just wasted like 5,000 points of damage because that ship died in like 2,000 hit points and you dealt 7,000. So there are some downsides to focus fire, but in general, most of the time, 99% of the time, it is really good to have the trait focus fire. The next one is offensive. They've got an additional 10% damage on weapons. So if I take a look at, for example, this basic unstable slug, it says it does 68 damage. If I pop it into the module, though, it says it does 74 damage. And that's because that extra 10% that you get for having the weapon in there does apply to any weapon type in here. And it's an important trait as well to making these guys better at attacking. So the next thing that we want to talk about is the weapon modules, or the placement of weapon modules for this class of ship. The other modules are important. Knowing how many of everything you can put into a ship is what defines the quality of that faction's ship. It is different for every faction, so this arrangement will be different on, say, the United Empire ships, or the Riftborn ships, or the Unfallen ships. Everyone has different module arrangements. But what's important for this type of ship is how many weapon modules it has, because that's really the role of it. I mentioned earlier that the protectors and coordinators are the ones that are likely to receive the brunt of enemy fire. And because that's true, these guys don't have to be focused as much on defense. Now, the caveat to that is if you have got a sort of small attacker that has got lots of defensive slots, like this particular model here has quite a lot of defensive slots, you could use them without using protectors because you don't need a tank to block for them. Whereas if you've got one that's loaded with tons of weapons but has no defensive modules, then in that case, you're probably saying to yourself, you know what, I desperately need that defender, which completely negates the need to really look at how defensive this type of ship class can be. So count the number of attacking modules with small attackers. That's going to usually 9 times out of 10 be the most important thing. If you are using a one that has lots of defensive modules and support modules and stuff like that, that's important to consider whether or not you actually need a defensive ship to block for it. Next up is the small protector. Now, these things do a few things that I think are kind of janky, but they also take 1 command point, but they've only often got 1 or at most 2 weapon module slots. they tend to have more defensive module slots. This particular thing does not have that many more. But they also have more utility slots. So the role of the protector is actually split between two things. It's either designed for tanking, where you've thrown in loads and loads of armor or whatever, and they've got this sort of thing going on for them. Or they've got lots of utility modules to help the entire fleet operate better, in which case you've got something like, say, loads and loads of fleet accelerators loaded into this thing here, and flotilla shield enhancers or something like that. So you can design these things in either direction. It's going to depend on what you want out of this type of ship, and also different factions have different dispositions. Some of them have a lot of defensive modules and not a lot of utility. Others have loads of utility and not a lot of defenses. Now, one of the important things to note about these ships is that ones that have got more gun modules are actually better. The reason is that you're probably going to want to put kinetic weapons into these guys, and that will allow them to shoot down enemy missiles. The ones that only have the one weapon module, generally speaking, can still get killed by missiles pretty easily. So I don't find, for example, this design to be all that appealing to me, but it does the job pretty well. It can get quite a lot done. Anyway, small, again, same sort of quality as it was for the small attacker. Protector, the role of the ship is to protect and assist other ships in battle. It will primarily attack attacker and hunter ships. Now, the problem with this is that most lanes, most flotillas have mostly got attacker ships. They don't have loads of defenders. So you're going to find that these guys are sort of spraying their shots all across those attackers and dealing minimal damage to them. So you can't bypass the enemy defenders by using loads of your own defenders and just having them shoot past the defenders. What's going to end up happening is that you're just sort of scraping a little bit of paint off of the attackers because your weapons deal shit damage. You've only got one weapon, and those attackers are probably going to be able to tank through that just fine. There are some exceptions to that, but we'll get into that later. The secondary target is, of course, protector and coordinator ships, and they will attack carriers last. So these guys are not necessarily that good at offense. The attack priority for this, though, is interesting for one thing. If you are going to use something other than the kinetic, or let's say that for argument's sake, you've got loads of weapon slots, so you've got some to spare, you could use something like the improved sync laser here. And what this does is it provides an energy weapon accuracy penalty. And since this would be attacking the attacker ships and not focus firing, if you spray this across a whole flotilla of ships that are all using energy weapons, this would cause all those attackers to have less accuracy, which would be really good defensively. So that is something that you might want to consider as a little trick to these guys. Next up, you've got the Guardian role. These guys are more likely to get shot. If something doesn't necessarily have priority to fire at these guys, they might still fire at these guys anyway. I find that that's often the case. And there's plenty of ships that just don't have target priority, period. They're very, very likely to attack the protectors first. I don't find it guaranteed, but it is way, way, way more likely that they'll attack this type of ship than they'll attack an attacker. Next up, they got defensive, plus 10% on plating and shields. So they get a bonus to their armor and energy shields just as much as the attackers get to their attack bonus. Next up, we've got the medium ships here.
And take just a second.
So for this one, we've got modules times 2. What does that mean here? Well, when we add a module to a slot of the ship, 2 modules will actually be equipped, so the power and cost is multiplied by the same amount. There are certain instances where I don't find that this works properly here, so if I input this thing here, it goes up to 8, which is the amount that we would expect a movement module to increase this by, rather than the amount that it should. So if there are actually 2 movement modules being put in there, that should increase it by 6, up to 11. So there are exceptions to that. The same thing goes for the medium support ships, adding in certain things there. But as well, like this thing is still plus 20% projectile damage, is not plus 40%. If we put in the drain essence thing, I think that one does double, actually. No, it doesn't. Okay. So, yeah, there are plenty of instances where that's a lie. But generally speaking, for, in particular, offense, defense, and hit points, this does multiply. There are some exceptions as well to support modules. If I put in the titanium A2S slugs there, the loss of life on sieging is 15. Throw it in there, it's actually 30. So it kind of varies. Just check what you're doing before you actually commit to it. In any event, though, yeah, so the attacker here, you can calculate how effective they are relative to your small ships by counting the number of module slots that they've got and then multiplying it by 2. You'll see that without the upgrade, these ones with the adamantium here require an upgrade to gain access to. We've got 3 of these weapon slots here. And for this class of ship, you're still looking for a ship that has loads and loads of weapon slots because, again, they're not going to be the primary target and they're going to be for dealing loads of damage. Ones, again, that also have lots and lots of defense modules could be used by themselves without a defender if you happen to swing that way. Now, the way that you account this ship if you do not have the upgrade is I've got 3 weapon slots, so it is equivalent to 6 small weapon slots. Now, if we were to go back to the small attacker here, without the upgrade it has 2 weapon slots, but you need titanium for the large or medium ship. So what we want to compare is this with the titanium cost compared to the Giant class without the adamantium. If we do have adamantium, we'll do a separate comparison. So this thing has 3 weapon slots of the small size and costs 1 command point. This thing here costs 3 command points and has 3 weapon slots or 6 small weapon slots. So it does the same amount of damage as 2 of the smaller ship. Unfortunately for this guy, it costs 3 command points. So if we don't have access to adamantium, it's more efficient for us to use titanium small attackers. So you can do this calculation quickly with any faction depending on sort of what you're doing. Some factions have, say, for example, a small attacker that has 4 weapon modules, in which case their medium ship has to have even more guns, and those factions do have even more guns on their mediums. But you want to figure out how proportionally good your medium ship is compared to your small ships. It might not be worth the investment of getting the medium ships, and it might not be worth getting the investment to get for the second tier small ships. Now, if we do have the upgrade to this thing, it has 4 modules and this one up here. Now, this one's actually special. This one provides an extra ×2 in addition to the normal amount there. So this is a ×4 module. So we've got 8 here and another 4 here. So once upgraded, this thing's worth 12 small slot weapons, or the equivalent of 4 of the upgraded small attackers. And since it only costs 3 command points, that means that if we do have access to adamantium, this is a more efficient attacker than the small attackers there. Just 1 second, sorry. Sorry about that. Anyway, one of the other things that we want to consider when we're looking at this type of ship is just the number of weapon modules independent of the number of weapon modules compared to a small ship. The reason is, if it's got a crap ton of weapon modules, it's more likely to be a good choice for missiles. The reason that's the case is that if you've got enough missiles, you can overwhelm a defender's flak defense. So even if someone has gone, for example, full kinetic weapons, but say they've only got 3 weapon slots on their medium ships, well, that means that I've got some weapons that are likely to go through and cause a hell of a lot of damage. This is probably the highest damage sort of setup that you can really get in any sort of practical sense there, but at the same time, if you've only got like 5 slots here, it's a little bit iffy as to whether or not you're going to be able to completely overwhelm an opponent's missile defense. Other than that, though, one of the things to keep in mind that utility slots are also going to be a little bit important for these guys, especially if you're building only one type of ship. But broadly speaking, you don't care what sort of utility slots are on this class of ship that much. Typically, that's a job for other types of ships there. Speaking of, we want to talk about the fact that this guy also has a plus 20% to the damage on weapons. Keep that in mind for a little bit later there. But yeah, this is a fantastic bonus just in terms of allowing these guys to pull even further ahead. It's almost always going to be the case that these guys deal more damage than their small counterparts. The question is by how much, and that extra 20% can really push the sort of envelope past where you would generally sort of expect it to be. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the next class here. This is the medium coordinator, and this is the defensive type ship again. Now, the things that you're going to want to look out for on this guy is the number of weapon slots that you can use for sort of point defense. That's going to be important there. The carrier capacity that you could potentially use if you really want to go sort of that direction, because there are times where you might want to go for something like, say, a bunch of fighters and don't have access to carriers. Honestly speaking, I think this is a bit of a useless strategy, using these guys as off carriers. I do it sometimes for the fun of it, but there are fringe benefits to using that, and I'll talk about that in a different video. But knowing how many slots it has for weapons and ships is going to be quite important. It allows you to know sort of how defensive you can go with these. Now, in this particular case, this bad boy has got 5 offensive slots. This is one of the rare ships that you could potentially overwhelm someone's attackers by using your defensive ship because of how bullshit powerful this type of ship is. If I had nothing but 3 of these in a lane, and my opponent had a medium defender and 2 medium attackers, these things would actually probably shred through those attackers pretty quickly. Just because the sheer amount of firepower that these guys have and the fact that most attackers have limited defenses. Again, one of the strange things though is that these guys only have plus 10% on their defense, which is weird. So the fact that they've also got a lower amount of, or an increased amount of hull weakness, which is a negative, matched with the fact that they don't necessarily get as big of a boost to their defense, means that medium ships, by comparison to the small ships, don't necessarily gain as much boost as the attacking counterparts do. Now, where these things become a little bit better at defending is that they've got about 4 times as many hit points as a small attacker, whereas or a small protector. So 4 of those guys would be approximately the same amount of hit points as one of these guys, which only takes 3 command points. So it's a little bit better in that regard, but then you have to try and keep track of all this other stuff, and I basically just don't like to think about it. In any event, the other thing that you of course want to think about is how many defensive slots you've got and how many utility modules you've got, because again, like with the smaller class of ship, these ships have dual purposes. They're both for defending, and they're also the ships that are going to carry the support modules that are going to bolster your fleet. So if you've got, if you have to put some sort of defensive modules or some siege modules or something like that, it's generally going to be on this class of ship. Depending on the disposition, whether or not it's more utility focused or more defense focused, you're going to end up with different design philosophies, and in particular, knowing how many utility modules you can cram into one of these guys is really key to figuring out how good your faction is going to be at planetary invasion and conquest type victories. If you don't have very many utility modules, one of the things that can go wrong is it takes a long time for your fleet to get into position, and once they do, they have poor siege utility and siege ability. So this is a very important ship class. I find that they're also, generally speaking, more survivable than the small protector, but unlike with the small attacker and the medium attacker, it's a little bit more faction dependent. I find that there are some instances where I would rather have the small-sized defender, the small-sized protector, rather than the medium coordinator, but it's really going to depend on which of these stats you're going to end up prioritizing, and it's kind of fuzzy as to what ends up being the better version of it. The way to think of it in some ways is that if you are okay with building lots of relatively inexpensive defenders that are going to be capable of soaking up damage effectively with cheap modules and stuff like that, then the small ones are actually a little bit better in some ways than trying to replace a medium defender. Like if a medium defender goes down, that's quite a lot of resources sunk, especially if you're buying a lot of expensive support modules. But if you just need a tank, then the small ones are usually going to be quite efficient at that. So that's kind of the way I think about it. It's a little bit tricky to determine. Also, a lot of the times the small ones have only like one weapon mount, whereas the larger ones can have more weapon mounts. So if you're up against a lot of missiles, even if the small one is quite good for your circumstances, you might need to switch to the medium-sized one just so that you've got more flak defense. It is going to be very, very situational, however. Lastly, we've got the carriers. Now, these guys, you can do the same sort of calculation that you did for the mediums to the smalls there. Each of these modules is worth 4 of the modules on a small ship, and these 2 large ones with the stars beside them are worth 8 small module slots. So, assuming we didn't have the second tier upgrade here, so we didn't have the access to the Quadrinix and Orichalcix slots here that you can see indicated, we would have this large slot, so double-sized, so 8, 12, 16, 20, we'd have the equivalent of 20 small weapons at the cost of 6 command points. So this is about equivalent to, say, 7 of these small ships with the titanium upgrade, and it's equivalent to less, about 1 2/3 of a medium ship. Now, it gets a bit fuzzy here because it does not have any bonus to attack. This has instead got the plus 10% health on squadrons and plus 10% damage on squadrons. So if you're going for carriers and you're going hard on bombers and stuff like that, mostly for the novelty of it, I would say more than the effectiveness of it, then these things gain a bit of a boost, but not as big a boost as the weapon boost that you see on the medium class of ships. Now, if I did have the upgrade as well and had the ability to equip all of the weapons on this model here, we'd have 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, 36 weapon slots, slot equivalents, blah. So that is more than twice what we have on the medium. It's actually it is literally 3 times what we'd have on mediums. So it becomes a lot more efficient in that sort of sense there. It is still missing that 20%, which does catch the mediums back up a little bit. But the main reason I still don't like carriers is because they lack the focus fire trait, which is extremely useful under a lot of circumstances. So to me, the carrier class has to be way, way, way stronger than the medium ship before I really consider the carrier to be my primary go-to option, just because it takes a massive amount of tech investment to get to it. And we'll be able to sort of see a battle where a carrier does not necessarily fare better against medium attackers. So in any event, yeah, carriers, more of a novelty than they are anything else. They are so deep into the tech tree, and you need other techs to make them useful. So realistically, by the time you've got access to these, you're probably going to have won the game or come close to winning the game anyway. Or you don't have the resources to sort of use them properly anyhow. So the exception of this is when you've got weak ships. Otherwise, I'd say the Sophons rely on the carrier a little bit more than others, but they can get through the tech tree a little bit faster than other people. So anyway, let's take a quick look at some other things here. Arcs and leechers we won't talk about here. We won't talk about behemoths in this one. That's going to be a different video. But in any event, let's take a sort of look at our fleet over here and get in a fight with it. So this is our look at the, always go to the advanced screen wherever you can, but this is our look at this composition versus their composition. We're probably going to go hard target because that's what our fleet would be best with. Now, this particular fleet does primarily use lasers, as you'll notice, but we've got these kinetic weapons over here that are going to be used for blocking enemy missiles. We've also got some carrier capability on these medium coordinators, just for the hell of it. Still, we're going to go ahead and move this over here. Going to move one of these down here. And the reason is that, generally speaking, lane 3 is capable of firing into lane 2. Lane 2 is not capable of firing into lane 3, so if we get this one done really, really quickly, we can help support this one. This one also can support that one, and generally speaking, lane 1 can't help anybody, but we don't have as much in here, and we've also got less weapon power, so we're probably just using this as a holding lane. Anyway, let's go ahead and hit watch here. Anyway, let's go ahead and hit this. And we'll go ahead and... he's moved his carrier up here and has nothing down in lane 3. So we'll be firing across this way. We'll be able to clear out lane 2 extremely quickly. Shield wall up here, that's interesting, because I don't think I'm pretty sure this is a long-range ship. Oh, it's kind of mixed. Okay. So we're taking a look at their sort of weapons here, and like what we're sort of wanting to understand is like, where are they going to be effective? Well, they're going to be at short range, it looks like, for a couple of those ships there. I think this one over here was a, maybe, if I can get the game to run. God damn it. Yeah, so
this is a missile ship.
So it's going to have an interesting time there. Anyway, let's go ahead and click to launch the battle here. There's the enemy fleet. They use the Vodiani models, this particular variety of rebel. We're going to watch from the overview camera so we can get a better idea of what's going on here. And here you can see the sort of direction that the ships are going to be traveling in. 2 is going to, I think, have broadside facing this lane here, but 3 is going to have a real hard time firing at these guys. These guys are not really going to be able to fire at anybody else other than this lane directly opposite them. So in any event, we're firing away at longest range possible here. So you can see the distances that we're at for different groups here, different flotillas are at. And we can also see these little lines here that indicate what my ships are firing at as well. One of the things as well, we can see from time to time missiles exploding over here. Those are missiles that are getting shot down by the flak defense that's on this medium coordinator. So those missiles are dealing 0 damage despite the fact that they're at their optimal range. Over here we've killed off, I think, a couple of their ships, by which I mean literally both of those ships, pretty much immediately. This fleet should be immediately starting to switch fire over to these guys, and you can see lines being drawn here. You can see that these guys are incapable of helping from this distance, except the carrier module on this guy is actually going to start helping. The bombers are eventually going to work their way out to here, although you can't see them on this version of the map. Still seeing loads of these little explosions just way out in front of my ships, and that's because those missiles really cannot help penetrate from this distance here. So, yeah, despite the fact that this thing here has got 4,864 attack value, which is really quite good actually. It's about a little bit higher than one of mine, as well as a lot of hit points. We're still able to deal tons and tons of damage to it, just because we've got better sort of disposition, better positioning, and so on and so forth. You can see my missiles as well from my hero ship there. They're getting shot down in addition. So Loads and loads of things going on here. Let's go ahead and turn the speed back up a bit. Should be moving into medium range fairly soon here, at which point my opponent will have a harder time in some ways, but an easier time in others. There goes their hero ship. Or that's their attacker. Those are their attackers. So all the shots should be coming in against their carrier now, and it is going down really fast. It's barely done any damage. We're at medium. As soon as we get into medium, their carrier explodes as well. Missiles still continuing to do 0 damage here. And like the thing is, they've gone kind of having some missiles on their ship there. You can tell that they split their missile fire with other things. And because they've done that, like, it's really easy for me to shoot down all their missiles. If they had nothing but missiles on that ship there, I might not be able to deal with all of that with one coordinator. I might still be able to do it. It's hard to tell. But that is ultimately the reason they're doing so little missile damage. You can check after the battle here, and we want to get rid of show missed shots here. And they did a total of 377 damage. Now, most of their damage should ideally have been coming from something like missiles. I can't even tell what this damage came from, just because the band here is so narrow. So I'm pretty sure I took 377 damage from kinetics, but I'm not 100% sure about that. The damage that we did here, 3,092 of it from the missiles. That's because they didn't have very good flak defense here. Actually, they should have had okay flak defense. They should have been able to defend against some of that. Possibly after those ships with kinetics got destroyed. Our kinetic weapons there, again, they're defensive, despite the fact that we had 3 ships that have good kinetic weapons. We only did 6,072 damage with those. It's the lasers that did the glut of the damage. That was, of course, what we had as our unit for damage there. Our bombers did 928. Like I said, bombers are kind of janky. It's hard to use them properly, but yeah, lasers did plenty of damage there. They're a very, very good damage dealing type of weapon there. So that's going to be our discussion about how the fleets work and the different classes of ships and how to sort of use those different ships. So in any event, I hope you found this episode enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope